Hello, everybody. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons. Just here, sitting out on another wonderfully mild day. Hopefully, it doesn't rain on me too here. It's a little overcast, but great out today. So, I'm going to do a little bit more stream of consciousness stuff here. I just want to have a little response, if you will. Lost Lore Scholar Jack has been running around on this Conan versus Drizzt Do'Urden kick, and I figured I'd just kind of put together a little bit of a response here. Put my thoughts forward on this. And it's kind of funny because I'd talked to him a little bit. I was on his stream, or he was on his stream, and I made some comments. But he did have one that he said was a bad faith argument, which is not, and then I'll explain why here in a minute. I know it kind of sounds that way, especially in a text comment, but it isn't. But this whole theoretical Conan versus Drizzt Do'Urden thing, and we love these things, don't we? The Batman versus the world, Punisher versus the world, Superman versus Goku, all this other stuff. We love looking at these kind of little things that really you gotta be careful with, especially when you get outside of like the comic book round and everything. When you're talking main character versus main character, because it's the main character story, and very rarely do you have like the end of the main character. And his interesting traits are going to be what's there. So you don't really get a whole lot of evidence of things that beat main characters. So you got to be careful when you're talking about reading the writing. So Conan versus Drizzt. Now, this is what I'm going to get to here now that I've had a couple of minutes of rambling. I like to look at this, and you got to think of it almost the same way that you think of the good old classic Goku versus Superman. Goku versus Superman is not a contest. Superman wins every single time, every single way. And you don't have to start digging into, oh, well, he has this power and he has that power and he accomplished this and he accomplished that. Stuff's a lot of fun, but usually these things can be solved simply by looking at what the key elements that make the character special are and how they interact, and you get your answer on these kind of things. So with Goku versus Superman, Superman is defined by not having limits. Goku is defined by overcoming his limits. And that's his whole thing. He's on the ropes. He unlocks the next level. He overcomes his limits. He saves the world. Superman, everybody knows he has no limits. Nobody can go head to head with him. And, even great powerful villains like Darkseid and whatnot, the way they handle Superman is they put him in situations where him having no limits on his powers doesn't matter, because the limit on Superman's power is his morality, is his sense of justice, is his worldview and his dedication to certain principles and protecting people. And that's how they do it. They get Jimmy Olsen, they get Lois Lane, they put him in situations where he has to be in two places at once. But you never have Superman really just being beaten head to head. And in the areas that it happens, it's definitely seen as an exception, and there's usually about 14 asterisks beside it. That, of course, is ignoring the fact that comic books retcon and change so often. I mean, you had Superman who used a machine gun back in the 20s, all the way up to Superman Prime, who is literally powerful enough to push the universe around if he wants to. So that's the question you need to answer that question. That's the only piece of information you need. One is defined by not having limits. There isn't a limit for Goku to reach and exceed in order to beat Superman. You would have a perpetual cycle of Goku hitting the next level, hitting the next level, hitting the next level, and it never being enough. You get the old conundrum. What happens when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object? Well, that's actually a very simple question. The unstoppable force is diverted. It moves, it goes up, it goes down, it goes sideways. It hits the immovable object and then it goes up it. So it doesn't stop moving, but it also doesn't move the immovable object. Of the two, the immovable object is the one that becomes the defining source. And that's what you need to look at when you talk about these fantasy character versus fantasy character things is, who is the unstoppable force, who is the immovable object? In the case of Conan versus Drizzt, Conan is the immovable object. Drizzt is often defined by he has an extremely high amount of skill. That of that there's no doubt. He has a lot of experience, but Drizzt is usually defined by finding his way in a world that won't accept him. He's often not the most powerful character in his stories, sometimes not by a long shot. Being that he is in a D&D world and is a D&D character, you have numerous situations where there are epic level characters like Elminster and the Lady of Silvery Moon and stuff like that that are objectively just far more powerful than Drizzt. And then you have Conan. Conan the Barbarian is never overcome by mortal foes. If in half the time he's not even overcome by supernatural foes. His strength, his speed, his agility, his reaction time, all of these things are presented as being primally superhuman, far beyond the abilities of a mortal person in all the stories that Conan's in. Where you get to the quote-unquote bad faith argument that I had is I said that Drizzt's biggest advantage in the argument between Conan versus Drizzt is that he's poorly written. And he is poorly written. All right, Ari Salvatore has certain things he's good at, certain things he's not. He's a formula author. He writes things within a formula, within a built story, but Drizzt is more or less accidentally a good character early on, and he really doesn't develop much beyond what he is. He tried to kind of turn that into a benefit for the character, as in he doesn't change as much because he's immortal and he's gotten into the part of his life where he's settled into his principles and who he is and everything. So the changing has stopped. But basically, the formula is Drizzt wins. So there's always a reason he does, even when as a character he should lose or he should be put in a position that's not surmountable. But he doesn't have that kind of depth as a character. He was originally designed to be this is kind of how you know that character building is not really Salvatore's biggest strong suit. Drizzt was never meant to be the main character. Wulfgar was. Drizzt was supposed to be Wulfgar's sidekick, but the readers attached themselves to Drizzt more than to Wulfgar. But he's written to always win, and it's the elite level skill and all this other thing that he fights. And I think he has a draw with Artemis and Tiri, and then they turn around and they completely ruin that because they show that it was set up on purpose, or it was a ruse designed to give Artemis impetus to move on, and that Drizzt didn't really lose. And then he has a draw with Albald Many Arrows, but that's really about it. There's not really enough challenge written into Drizzt's character, and it makes him look stronger than he really would be. Conan deliberately is not somebody who can be defeated by other mortals. Even 5, 6, and 7 of them can't overcome him. He is stronger than a Wulfgar. A Wulfgar who was able to challenge and push Drizzt, with the caveat of Drizzt is really not trying to hurt him. He could just kill him, but that's all he could do. It's not a matter of trying to analyze abilities and feats and stuff. It's a matter of looking at the characters and what they represent. Just like Superman, Conan represents a primordial force that can't be overcome by another mortal force. Drizzt is a mortal force who is designed to win despite the odds. He's designed to have a way to pull it out at the end. He's designed to have enough to make up for a mistake. That's not enough to beat a Conan the Barbarian. Not as Conan is written by Robert Howard. And that's really all you have to go into it. That's the simplicity of it. If you actually read through all the Conan stories, Conan is a far more complete character than Drizzt. Even though Conan only existed in a decade or so of short stories, and Drizzt has 3 decades of novels written about him, he still isn't as developed as a character, and that leads him to be a simple, always wins warrior archetype. Whereas Conan, the flaws of his character, the flaws of him as a human being and stuff, all exist within that character because he's better developed. But in the end, King Conan, as an aging, dying man, is still able to fight off numerous assassins who are elite assassins that are outnumber him and are many, many years his junior, and he can beat them unarmed and unarmored without really even having to struggle as an old man with God knows how many battle injuries. Because Conan represents a primal force of savagery that is beyond a mortal opponent. Any single mortal opponent. Without magical aid, without Guinevere, without Twinkle and Icing Death, without the anklets that allow him to move faster and all that stuff, Drizzt does not stand a chance against Conan the Barbarian. Period. That's just all there is to it. And you even kind of see this to a certain extent because Drizzt had a arc in his story where he was the barbarian. He was his primal need to survive in the Underdark came out and almost overrode his entire humanity. And then he buried it until Old Many Arrows invaded and he thought his friends were dead and he released the barbarian again. And that is Drizzt out there on his pure fighting instinct. That is Drizzt putting a toe into the world of a force of what Conan actually is. This is the Conan part of Drizzt's personality that is his powerful, instinctive fighter. Whereas Conan is that force of personality. He is that id-driven super warrior who is harder muscled, faster, quicker, smarter, sharper than the people that are around him in those instinctive areas, in particular in survival and fighting and ability to take wounds and injuries and things of that nature. You're just not going to have a situation where equally matched Drizzt is going to beat Conan. It's just not going to happen. And really, the only reason you have any argument to that period, other than fanboyism, because you're going to have fanboyism where it doesn't matter what is presented, a person's going to say one way or the other. And of course, this is all just a fun hypothetical. But if you look at the way they're written and you look at the things they're supposed to represent, basically Drizzt at his most deadly and his best ability is Drizzt imitating Conan to survive. Conan survived as that from birth, basically. Immovable object, unstoppable force. The unstoppable force is deflected. But that's what I got on that. I will, like I said, a little bit rambly, definitely not super structured or scripted here, but figured I'd put that out there and put my thoughts on it to voice here. And I'll see you guys next time.